Thank you, Senator. Senator Ernst, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also would like to express my condolences to the family and the friends of the late General Stewart. So good morning to our witnesses, and thanks for the testimony today. The greatest military challenge that we face is really a two-front competition, as you've laid out so well this morning, between China and Russia. So I do agree with your judgment that China and Russia will maintain their strategic ties, which does create potential threats. And let's be clear, we've heard you state over and over again, as we've seen China and Russia advancing, they are clearly encircling us around the globe. So China proclaimed a no-limits partnership on the eve of Russia's invasion, and she just went to Moscow and affirmed that commitment. And we watched all of that unfold on our television sets. And Director Haynes, first to you, how has Beijing's assessment of its junior partner in Moscow changed since the invasion? And then to you, General Barrier, do the recent joint military exercises suggest a deeper or deepening military commitment between the two countries?
Thank you, Senator. So in terms of how the relationship has changed, and particularly China's perception of it since the invasion of Ukraine, I will say that even before the invasion of Ukraine, we recognized that China and Russia were getting increasingly closer, and that we were seeing cooperation across all different sectors. But to your point, since the invasion, that closeness has accelerated to some extent, and in part this is due to the fact that Russia is increasingly beholden to and needs China, and China perceives Russia increasingly as, a country that was already in the sort of little brother role, is often how it's described, but nevertheless is now even more beholden, and therefore they have greater leverage. And that can sort of manifest itself in the context of various aspects of the relationship, such as in the Arctic, where they actually have differing interests, where, China is not an Arctic country, but wants to be in effect and wants to have more power and authority in that area. And Russia recognizes that they're going to need China and their investment in order to get to some of the resources that they're interested in the Arctic. And as a consequence, that China sees an opportunity, and an increasing one, in light of the current scenario with Russia. And so we see them now at sort of the peak of their economic trade, continuing military exercises and other types of collaboration and political and technical. And it is moving, even as we continue to assess from an intelligence community perspective that there are limits, ultimately, that they are unlikely to get to the point of being like NATO allies, for example, as we see them.
Great. Thank you. General Barrier.
Senator, I would describe it as deepening, and it's been gradual, but the complexity, the scope, and the tempo of these joint exercises is increasing, mostly in the air domain and the naval domain. We don't have a lot of insight into more sensitive activities, but I do believe that it is deepening and growing.
Thank you. And to both of you as well, with this partnership and the deepening of their military commitment through exercises and so forth, how can we find a wedge and really divide the two countries by driving a wedge between them? What can we find as a strategy to separate those two powers?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have done some analysis, and we can get you a more thorough explanation rather than my quick remarks. But I would say that we do see some challenges for them in getting, as they get closer and closer. And largely, one can recognize that there is a tension where there's such an asymmetry in the power of the relationship, where you can actually use that to some extent to exploit some of the challenges. But it is, I think that it is unlikely that we will take them really off the trajectory of continuing to get closer in the coming years.
Senator, I believe it's a really tough problem, and it's a great question. In a closed session, there would be some things that we could discuss.
Okay, excellent. And with that, I'll yield my remaining time. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the chairman, I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Director Haynes, I do recognize the importance of the FISA Section 702 authorization. As you noted, 59% or so of the information given to the President daily is sourced to 702. However, Americans do have a constitutional right to not be searched without a warrant. So despite the efforts of Congress, there have been reported examples of the intelligence community using 702 to target U.S. citizens. That's not supposed to happen. So your own office's annual transparency report estimates that in 2021, the FBI conducted approximately 3.4 million queries of Section 702 acquired data on U.S. citizens. Clearly, existing safeguards are not enough. I have a series of quick questions I'd like to ask for your response, quick responses. Director Wood, imposing a warrant requirement before the government searches Section 702 acquired data for Americans' communications hamper your intelligence gathering against malign foreign actors?
Thank you, Senator. So a few things. One is 702 is an authority that is only permits the targeting of foreign persons outside of the United States.
Yes.
So, so just to be clear, if a U.S. person were to be targeted under 702, that would be unlawful, and that is something that's not compliant. When you talk about the 3.4 million searches that the FBI did, that's not where they're targeting U.S. persons. So what is happening there is there's about, it's a less than 4% of the data that is brought in from FISA that the FBI is able to search. And when they're doing searches, often what they're looking for is connections that allow them to identify victims of, for example, cyber attacks or other things like that. So they're searching through an existing database to see if there's a connection that ultimately would allow them to make that connection. And we can talk about this more in private, in the closed session to give you greater detail. But for example, within the 3.4 million, 1.9 million was related to a particular cyber attack. So it just gives you a sense of the difference, and that's not something that that is necessarily. In other words, it's not something that's subject to a warrant, nor would it be subject to a warrant per se. But as a general matter, if we had to seek a warrant for every target of a foreign person abroad, there's no question it would have an enormous impact on our work and make it much more challenging.
Yes, but with 3.4 million inquiries based on data collected through an appropriate 702 inquiry of foreign citizens outside of the U.S., I think there are concerns. So my next question is, what statutory limits and judicial oversight to prevent the collection and the use of Americans' communications and other Fourth Amendment protected information hamper your intelligence gathering efforts against malign foreign actors?
And make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. If you're asking us what are additional reforms that we would be willing to make, we are absolutely open to considering reforms. The Attorney General and myself wrote a letter to Congress letting you know that that is something we would be happy to discuss. We have. I mentioned that we've engaged in a number of reforms in the last few years to try to promote additional oversight, and we'd be happy to talk about whether or not those should be.
I am running out of time, so there are concerns about limiting the permissible pool of Section 702 targets and also perhaps removing barriers to existing judicial review. So, yes, I look forward to working with you. You did mention in your testimony that you have the Foreign Malign Influence Center, and you noted that China, Russia, and Iran may be doing things that will interfere with our upcoming elections. Can you just give us an example of the kinds of tools that we'd use, and then how do you alert our elections officials to this kind of interference?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do and did relatively recently an intelligence community assessment on election influence and interference. There is a version of it that is unclassified that we can, that we've made public as well. The kinds of things that we look at are, in fact, efforts by adversaries, including Russia, obviously, engaging in information campaigns or in other types of disinformation work to try to undermine, for example, candidates or positions or things along those lines. And we absolutely do share that information both with the Department of Homeland Security, with FBI, and they tend to be the ones to make the connection directly to the election officials within the United States. And there's a fairly robust, sort of network that has been developed in order to provide this kind of information.
Thank you. General, thank you very much for your 39 years of service. I did have some questions for you that I'll submit for the record. I call on Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Thank you both for being here and for your service. I had to step out for a while to take a phone call from a reporter in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And the reason for the question was, as you know, the administration yesterday announced an expansion of scrutiny over land purchases around military bases. They added, I think, 8 or 9 bases in states like North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, Iowa, to the 100-mile radius for a highly sensitive base. In other words, it was giving CFIUS jurisdiction within 100 miles of these bases. One of them is the Grand Forks Air Force Base, and another one the Minot Air Force Base. You may recall we had quite a year last year dealing with a Chinese purchase of some land near Grand Forks for a wet corn mill facility. Anyway, all of that, finally the Air Force said, bad idea, let's not do it. CFIUS didn't have jurisdiction because it was only 12 miles from the base. I ask, my question isn't to comment specifically on Grand Forks and CFIUS, but rather, is there an increased intelligence involvement or scrutiny of land purchases by foreign entities, particularly adversarial foreign entities?
Yes is the simple answer, in the sense that over the last many years now, just as a broader context, and I suspect you already know this, but basically, as we have enacted tools such as CFIUS, for example, using the Chinese as an example, they have figured out ways to get around some of these issues in order to still try to achieve the results that they're looking to achieve. And we have seen, in the mechanisms that on a bipartisan basis administrations have enacted, I think expanding from the CFIUS statute, for example, to an executive order that allows for the review of transactions where telecom companies, for example, are purchasing land and then selling, telecom services to U.S. citizens, where that information may be then taken and misused. So there's a variety of examples, I think, of scenarios in which that issue at least has come up. That's helpful.
Well said. I appreciate it. General, anything you'd want to add to the?
Clearly a counterintelligence threat, Senator. You laid that out, and in the purview of the DOJ and the FBI here in CONUS. But from a foreign perspective, we see this behavior and activity in other countries around the world. Clearly a huge counterintelligence threat.
Great, thank you. With regard, I want to comment on Senator King's questions about ISR and the 1% to 2% dedicated to specifically to drug trafficking. Is that simply a prioritization issue, or do we just need more capacity to do really good ISR? Because I want to be fair that 1% to 2% isn't very much, but do we have enough in general to cover all of the things that you have to watch?
Senator, every combatant commander that speaks before this committee will say the same thing, that they don't have enough ISR. I think it's a capacity issue. Certainly, technology can help, advances in space and other sorts of sensing capabilities. But it's a really difficult conversation with our Southcom partners on how bad this problem is.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I suspected as much, and you're right. It is unanimous among the combatant commanders. So, Director Haynes, I'm going to really shift gears here a little bit because we're talking about worldwide threats, and it's easy to talk about the big ones that are obvious and always in front of us. But there are other smaller skirmishes here and there that I think may not be as significant, but still significant. I'd like your take on one in particular, and that is what's going on in Haiti. I have a number of friends that are involved in charitable work. In fact, I'm kind of stunned how many friends I have involved in charitable work, and they're just distraught about what's going on in Haiti. Now, Haiti, I'll tell you where it is in its proximity, and maybe you could just tell me a little bit about what you were seeing in Haiti, to the degree you're able to tell me what you think, what's being done and what can be done. And these are policy questions, I understand that, but I think we need to engage a little bit and not just let it fall, because for obvious reasons. Maybe you just expand the last 30 seconds of my time on that.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more with the fact that this is a really vexing issue and one that should be focused on. And I can tell you that from an intelligence community perspective, we have been looking to try to find ways to support, in effect, what I understand the policy community is looking at, which is a multinational force that would try to address the situation, both from the perspective of training police and also to sort of try to manage the violence that has erupted and the gang control of territory in this area. And I will say briefly that, first of all, we have a lot of analytic products. I'm happy to provide you what I think is the best that we have on this, but it is, none of it is optimistic, which is to say that this is a really challenging situation, and it does not look as if it is going to get better anytime soon.
So, if I might, General, are there security concerns in addition to just the moral and ethical concerns?
I think there are security concerns and moral and ethical concerns. When I look at it, it's sort of the loss of credibility in the government and government institutions, their ability to provide services, a terrible economy, a population at risk, and at the same time, this rise of these organized criminal elements that seem to be taking over and challenging the security forces. So really a perfect storm, and I think in our hemisphere, we are paying attention to that.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Senator Kramer. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So cryptocurrency is now the method of choice for countries to evade sanctions so that they can fund weapons programs, support spying, and promote cyber attacks. Crypto crime is hidden, but we know that in 2022 alone, there was over $20 billion in illicit transactions. We also know that Russia, Iran, and North Korea moved around at least $8 billion using crypto. So let's focus for just a minute on North Korea. This one country stole a record-breaking $1.7 billion. According to the UN Security Council, North Korea uses its crypto crime to fund its nuclear weapons development. General Barrier, you lead the Defense Intelligence Agency, which collects intel on foreign militaries, including on North Korea. When North Korea launders billions of dollars worth of crypto and funnels it into its nuclear program, does that threaten our national security?
Certainly, Senator, as North Korea steals that money and then tries to turn it into a legal tender, which at great cost, as you know, that is helping them build their nuclear capacity, and that is a threat that we recognize.
Thank you. So, Director Haynes, earlier this year, the U.S. intelligence community, which you lead, put out its annual threat assessment in which you identified North Korean cryptocurrency heists as part of a, and I'm going to quote you here, sophisticated and agile espionage, cybercrime, and attack threat. So let me ask you, does a sophisticated and agile espionage, cybercrime, and attack threat undermine our national security?
Yes, absolutely. And just to pull it apart, to say that it's not just, although obviously the funding is critical, it's not just the funding of essentially nuclear programs that the DPRK may have involved in, but it's also posing a cyber threat to important networks, and that's part of what it is that we see as this national security threat.
Thank you. So let's move to another example. A 2021 study found that nearly 5% of the world's Bitcoin mining takes place in Iran. The biggest crypto mine in the country is run by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and is backed by Chinese investment. How much sanctions evasion are we talking about here? Well, one crypto exchange alone, Binance, has processed $8 billion worth of Iranian transactions since 2018. So, General Barrier, when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps uses crypto mining to replace revenue that they lose through sanctions, does that threaten our national security?
Senator, I think it certainly threatens our U.S. forces in the region. Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is one method of how they finance their operations, so I think it's certainly a component of that, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to do get one more example in here, and that's Russia, because Russia is ransomware central. The most prolific and dangerous ransomware gangs are thought to be run by criminals in Russia. Russia-affiliated ransomware gangs have stolen from American schools, American hospitals, American power stations, and American businesses. Director Haynes, do you know what portion of ransomware is paid in crypto?
So we assess that the vast majority of modern ransomware operators demand cryptocurrency, and when those demands aren't met, they probably, are paid in that form. But part of the challenge for us in terms of identifying specifically how much is being used, is using cryptocurrency, is that all ransomware incidents or payments aren't reported or documented.
Fair enough,
We just
fair
don't
enough.
have
But
that.
when the HSGAC committee, Homeland Security Committee, put out its report, it said basically it's 100%. Does that sound about right to you? This is a business model built on crypto, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority, I think over 90% is perfectly reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, General Barrier, does the fact that ransomware gangs in Russia and around the world are using crypto to demand ransoms from American hospitals and schools and power stations and businesses, does that threaten our national security?
I believe it does, Senator, yes.
Yeah, I appreciate this. I appreciate your answers. Just think about what we're talking about here. North Korean nuclear weapons, Iranian sanctions, Russian ransomware, drug trafficking, human trafficking. Some of the major threats to our national security are facilitated by crypto. And that is why Senator Roger Marshall and I will soon reintroduce our bill to crack down on illicit crypto activity. Our bill is not about SEC regulation or cracking down on crypto investor scams, although I think we need to do that. Our bill is about law enforcement and national security and keeping our country safe.